An often skeptical world is watching Africa's ascent on the global stage. And a new book, The Brave Code, arrives timelessly as a groundbreaking manifesto for the continent's youth to live up to their untapped potential. Written by Musa Kalenga, with a background as a technologist, marketer, brand communicator, and entrepreneur, he brings a wealth of expertise and insight to this new work. He's with me now. So, Musa Kalenga, a very warm welcome. You woke up one day and you decided that you were going to write another book. What inspired this?
I woke up one day. I like how you say that. There's a long labor of love, as you know, book writing tends to be. But I suppose they say never waste a good crisis. The reality of a lot of my reflections were that the world is in a state of crisis. If you look at the political landscape, geopolitics, if you look at where society is at the moment, if you look at global economy, South Africa's economy, we can't deny the fact that we're in a crisis. And I think the premise of the book is that I've been very fortunate to be in an organization that is in the eye of the storm. And in the spirit of not wasting a crisis, I thought, let me write about how I think it's best for us to ride the storm and what I think is an opportunity once everything settles. And so the Brave Code really was born from that point of view, and it was a labor of love. I did it differently to the way I did it last time, but similarly, I thought it was well timed.
So, riding the storm, as you put it, also, in your opinion, requires a radical shift, particularly as far as the situation on the continent is concerned.
Yep.
I'm wondering what that radical shift is.
Yeah, so the principle is everything has now become so connected that we live in an ecosystem where all the nodes touch each other. And so the underlying concept in the book is a principle of shared value, which I can't claim to have invented. I think it's a principle that exists. It's being studied in many different university and
shared value is helping each other. It's cooperating with each
other.
Correct.
Yeah? In a common goal to make the ecosystem better for all, right? Whereas the principles of capitalism aren't based on shared value. So we've got this philosophy that is responding to our reality, and then we've got the way things actually are, and I think sometimes those two things are at odds with each other. So taking that principle of shared value, I try to apply it in our industry, which is advertising, marketing, communication. And the goal was to try and articulate a way to tackle our industry from a shared value perspective and challenge some of the things that had been taken for granted, had been normalized about the way we go about business, the way we go about treating our people, and ultimately give people, hopefully, a way to try and navigate that for themselves as they try and figure it out as well.
In difficult times, in a crisis situation, often though people become inwardly focused, they become insular, they become very self-protective, so they don't want to share. It's a real leap of faith in many ways that you're asking people to embrace.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of it comes from probably maybe contrarian thinking, right? I've been very fortunate. I've been exposed to the world of technology. And you'll realize that technology also started out. I mean, the internet was born it was actually born from the Secret Service, right? It was a very secretive thing. It was a technology that they kept to themselves because it gave them an advantage on the field of battle. Fast forward, there was an era where everybody was talking about the open web. They were talking about how you take something so powerful and you make it available freely. There were platforms that were born from that principle, is that people published their code bases so people could do whatever it is that they wanted to do. So this principle of openness, I think I appreciated from the point of view of technology. And when I think about the value of being more open versus being more closed, once again, given where we are as a society, it is better to be more open because the challenges we're facing are probably being faced by someone else somewhere else. And so if our goal is to kind of insulate and keep it to ourselves, we aren't actually keeping true to the principles of shared value. And there's a whole lot that comes with that, because the question then, is how do you create competitive advantage? How do you ensure that, as people call it, your secret sauce remains your secret sauce? And some of those things I wouldn't say I have answers to, but I certainly think that we have to do something differently in order to get a different outcome.
But there is a bit of risk in compromise, though, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I suppose you have to decide on which risk you would like to have. So there's the risk of not doing anything, and there's the risk of doing what you've been doing all the time, and then there's the risk of trying something new and seeing what happens. My choice and my appetite is to try something new and see what happens. I'm going to observe, and I am observing, a lot of either competitors or other businesses that are choosing other risks. The risk of continuing on the path and kind of sticking to their guns. And some of them have come off short. A lot of businesses post-COVID haven't continued to operate at the pre-COVID levels because they've stuck to what they were doing. A lot of businesses have had, unfortunately, closed down. So the route I'm taking, or the risk that I'm taking, is to do something different and see what that comes with, and hopefully it pays off.
You talk about a departure from historical practices,
Yeah.
as you've suggested.
Yeah.
How do you create disciples in that respect, in the new way of thinking? Is it about whipping them into shape? Is it the carrot and the stick? Or is it just demonstrating that the old way just doesn't work anymore? What's the philosophy of leadership in that respect?
It's a very important question. So I think there's merit in all the things you've mentioned. I have to choose what comes naturally to me, right? So yes, I do believe there is a dictatorship aspect that could have merit, where you decide this is the direction we're moving in it, and if you're not on the bus, get off the bus. I think for certain people and their characters and their personalities, that works. I personally believe in a slightly different philosophy. I believe that you have to inspire people to move and to change. And I think for my sins, it is the harder route. It's the harder route because you have to start by focusing on getting people to believe in something. And for me, certainly the starting point with the journey of the Brave Group is to define a purpose that I believed in. It's no secret, I've shared it openly many times, that I've had lots of dissonance with the traditional agency model. And so my starting point was, is there something I can articulate as a purpose that I believe in? Because if I can believe in it, then I can obviously go on, and get other people to believe in it. Step one. That in itself was very difficult because the principle of shared value feels counterintuitive for our industry. So I went through a lot in trying to land that with the business, in trying to get people to understand what I was talking about. And in the beginning, it was very random, I must be honest. People didn't quite connect with this shared value thing. What is it? What isn't it? So it was difficult and it was a bit frustrating. But then some magic started to happen, because we had demonstrable stuff that we could show, in the way we remunerate people, in the way we incentivize around performance, in the way we manage performance. And as that started to happen, the penny started dropping for many different people around, okay, that's what shared value means. And when I started to see that happening, it was a signal to me that other people could explain it to our teams and could take it forward. So we're now in this really interesting place where I think the foundations of what I personally believe have been articulated to the business. There's a point of view that the business has adopted, which I think my ExCo and the team members in the business now understand. And I think we're in a point where we have to accelerate that and make it truly impactful to the world around us. So that has been the process. But as you said, it was not easy at all in the beginning. It was actually fairly frustrating for me. But I'm happy to say that we are not there anymore. We're in a slightly different place in terms of understanding and adoption.
Musa Kalenga, you are a great believer and a great proponent in the potential and the power of young people, particularly young people on this magnificent continent of ours. Is this a philosophy just aimed at the millennials, or is this something that you can inculcate in a broader way?
No, absolutely not. So I think it is a philosophy that is cross-generational. I think for obvious reasons, it has to be one that really appeals to the younger generation because they're inheriting the long run. But it doesn't exclude older generations. Now, what I've come to find is that there are certain mindsets, when I talk about older generations, there's certain mindsets that lend themselves to understanding what we're trying to do, and they believe in it, and they partake in it, even if it's, maybe academically. But there are others that just don't, right? And that's also okay. And that struggle has been less easy to navigate because you'd think with experience, with age, with time, you'd have a better appreciation of the right thing to do. And I think sometimes people just can't consolidate the right thing to do with what's required of them. So as long as the right thing is happening out there, it's fine. As soon as I have to do the right thing, it means I have to change what I know and what I do. And that's uncomfortable, which I understand. But the philosophy itself is meant to connect generations because my belief, similarly to believing in young people, is that there's lots of shortcomings that our youth display all the time. They've got energy, they've got relevance, they've got understanding, they've got agency in many ways, but they lack steer, they lack diligence, they lack all those things. And so for me, the exercise is the connection point.
And wisdom and experience, which is critical.
Absolutely. So I think it's the coming together of versus one or the other. And we have to mobilize young people because, as I said, they will inherit the earth, as the saying goes.
All right, so how do we mobilize young people? And all very well to have a philosophy like this, but how do you keep it sustained in a business? We're going to talk about that in just a moment, but very quickly I want to show you a cover of the book, The Brave Code. So the book is called The Brave Code, Pioneering a Shared Value Creative Enterprise. The author is the well-known Musa Kalenga, and let's continue our conversation. All well and good, okay? You have espoused a very ethical and a very interesting philosophy in terms of running a business. How do you make sure that each and every day it is working and it's, more importantly, is sustainable, that it's not just a fad?
Yeah, good question. And the answer is I don't fully know yet, but I'll tell you what we are doing. So our planning process has changed since we started this philosophy. There's a very important meeting of minds, and there's a very important accountability that is passed on to the teams that are responsible for the goals we achieve. So a big part of our planning process is to ensure that people are giving that plan into the business as opposed to the business giving them the plan. That takes away the feeling that you're on a bus that you don't want to be on. Takes away the feeling of being instructed to do something versus believing in it. And so that allows people to have far more ownership on the stuff that we need to achieve. So on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, the plan that we have is created by the people that are accountable for it. The premise of shared value is that people should share not only in the reward, but in the risk of the business. And the transparency that we have with regards to how we account for financial success, how we manage risk, how we take on the experiments that we often do is actually shared with everybody. So the weight doesn't sit on anybody's shoulders, but rather on the shoulders of the collective. So in our exco meetings, as an example, we've got a very clear way that we make people account for what they should be doing. We are supportive in that regard, but we're also very clear that accountability is shared by the collective. So from a day-to-day perspective, that's how I try and ensure that we align to True North. The principles that we then speak about as a leadership and management team, I'm very encouraging of our leaders to take back into their teams. So the frequent communication that is required, the checking in and the feeding back that they need to do with their teams on the ground, the constant sense of connectivity that you need to maintain is important. So I'm a big believer in more frequent check-ins than waiting for the proverbial to hit the fan and then having this massive intervention. And so as a way of working, I think a lot of people have adopted the principle of let's rather have more frequent, shorter check-ins than wait for stuff to become burning platforms. So that on a daily basis, I think has helped a lot of people. In that, there's also a very clear requirement from a management tool perspective. What has been an interesting discovery for me is that we don't have the best managers in advertising and marketing. We have people that have become managers as a result of tenure. So you've been doing it for X amount of years, therefore you are now a manager. But that's a very different skill.
Often reluctant managers.
Correct. It's a very different skill to you being able to, manage a creative output or, produce something. So I made that assumption in the beginning. I just thought, you've been doing this for 25 years. Of course you know how to manage people. And the reality is that most times people don't. So there's a very clear learning agenda across a group as well, where the agency management program is looking at the pipeline of managers, and the EXCO also encouraged on a very clear learning journey to be able to up the skills from a management perspective.
I want to pick you up on two phrases. One was everyone in the bus, and the other one was the burning platform. From time to time, any organization who is on the bus is going to hit the burning platform. In other words, there will be failure, Musa.
Absolutely.
And failure is something that is disappointing, but I guess lessons are learned from it. Again, from the shared value perspective or philosophy, how do you deal with failure?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky one, Jeremy, because I think now, I mean, certainly as we go into the new financial year, we're excited about it. But we've had a decent performance the last 2 years, and we're starting off in not the greatest position. And so I'm feeling exactly what you're saying now. So we have to get our engine into gear, and we have to achieve massive goals by the end of this financial year. So what I perceive as failure is a slow start to the year. What has been interesting is that the team around me and my team almost they're shock absorbers. So when you think about shared value, because people are as vested, you've got this principle of being able to absorb shock as a team, which I thought was very different. And so the level of concern and the level of care that I take is also a shared level of concern and care with the rest of the team.
And not being recriminatory.
Correct. And so that's been interesting, because it's literally played out in the last 2 or 3 weeks that I've seen that people are going, okay, we're kind of in this together. So that first absorbing of the shock is now a shared thing, which I think is great. The second thing is the immediate response, right? So, one of my clear philosophies is that now that we have a plan that we believe in, we need to stick to it, right? And the temptation is when you have failure or you come across a hurdle, is that everything must shift and everything must change, right? And so being accountable to the plan and believing in the plan is equally important. Now, the shifts we need to make on a day-to-day perspective or in a 3-week or a 6-week sprint are about how we dial up intensity, right? So the next 6 weeks, as an example, we're going to dial up intensity. And that's because we're solving for something quite specific. And being able to communicate with the team lands well because they understand the framing of the problem and they understand the plan that we have. So I think it comes down to the way we've communicated that. It comes down to people feeling as though they are fully in frame. And when they see decisions getting made, it's not kind of like, where's that coming from and why that decision and how did you arrive at that point? So that synchronicity, I think, we've been able to achieve. And it's just communication, really. It's just communication.
I want to pivot the conversation away from the business that you're running to something a little more expansive, if I can.
Yep.
And how do you take the philosophy from where we're sitting now and create a ripple effect around that?
So I think there's a couple of key things that should be priority to young people, right? And if we can figure out how to articulate a shared vision around onboarding knowledge, I think it's an important. And I purposefully don't say education. Education is a byproduct of onboarding knowledge, and some people have the luxury of it in our African context. Some people don't.
Sure.
But in terms of access to information, I think most people have got some degree of access to information, more than the formal education system. So there's one shared vision that I would encourage strongly, is immerse yourself in knowledge of some sort. And in my view, go deep in a vertical that is of interest to you and try and get as close as possible to personal mastery in that vertical. Right. I think the big issue with a lot of our young people is they become jack of all trades because of the internet, because of just, this complete barrage of, seeming information. They just kind of skirt across multiple things, right? And they create the sense that they actually know what they're doing, but they don't. So my first piece of advice is find a body of knowledge or area of interest and go deep in it as much as possible to the point, as feasibly as possible, of a grasp and mastery, which I think is important. The second thing is, once you've been able to do that, number one, it liberates you as a young person to be able to do multiple other things, because it's kind of like scaffolding, and you would understand this, is once you've mastered something, there's core underlying things that you've had to have done. You've had to have discipline, you've had to have diligence, you've had to do it consistently to be able to get to a point. So that's very important. The second thing is, creativity as one of the skills of the future is never something that is put front and center. It's almost as a byproduct, especially in an economy like South Africa. South Africa is an economy of accountants, of engineers, bankers, and people who've got very formal and hard qualifications. And so the role of creativity has never fully found its feet, because it comes down to, are you able to balance the books? Are you able to understand the hard aspects of a skill? And so I think that creativity should come to the forefront. So if you've been able to master something and you're able to exhibit some creativity, my assertion is that you can move into many industries and many sectors and be able to add value. And yes, you might not be a trained accountant or a trained engineer, but your ability to look at the situation with a very different set of eyes is different. So mastery is the first one, creativity is the second, and it goes without saying, technology becomes important. As young people, you are native to a lot of this stuff. So you're probably going to be able to see around corners, and it's going to frustrate you because you probably see things that other people don't. But if you've done the first two things well, you've had mastery and you've been able to apply creativity, your chances of being able to create something from a technology perspective are that much higher.
Damn, I wish you'd been around when I was a young man. It would have made things a whole lot easier. Musa Kalenga, the book is also described as an invitation to engage in a movement. That's a pretty grand thing to say, but I'm very happy to accept it because I think you're right. Okay, I think that there's a lot of merit in what you're saying. So how do you start that movement? So we've looked at how this is working in the business. We've looked at it as far as young people are concerned and the African continent. Now what about the bigger picture here?
So,
and please don't tell me you're forming a political party.
Wouldn't my mother be happy about that one? No, I'm not forming a political party. But I think with enough common reference points, we can form a movement, right? And if I just reflect on the process, I think there's a very important inward reflection that is required of anybody that is in positions of power or in the care of others. And as I mentioned, when I started this journey with the Brave Group, I had to go through that myself. So if you're sitting as a senior manager, leader, etc., do yourself a favor and go through that process. Because the sooner you have that internal clarity, it'll help guide a lot of other things. So that's step one, which is most important. Step two, you have to locate yourself in environments and spaces that you think can align to that. I made many decisions in my jungle gym career that was around being in a space for a very specific reason, right? And that deliberate reason was to acquire either skills, knowledge, or understanding. And it was never to stay in that space forever, just to an end goal. And based on the initial point of reflection, that should always be a moving target. So if you're not located in a space where you feel like you're adding value or moving towards that, then obviously there's a very clear question to be asked. As senior leaders, managers, executives get younger and younger, I think what people are seeing as a behavior of shifting all the time, as a behavior of seeming non-committed, is simply because that internal reflection is not aligning with the business that they're in or the space that they're in. That's the second thing. The third thing is when people are in your charge or you're in charge of other people. I strongly believe in the transformational philosophy, right? So your goal and your simple, pure objective is to make those around you better than yourself, right? And if you do believe that, off a principle of reflection, believing that you're in the right context and environment, and truly wanting to make those around you better than yourself, I think that's how we're going to effect change.
Let's finish the conversation with an admission from me. I am a shocking manager. I've tried it on a number of different incarnations in my career, and I think part of it is you've got to enjoy it.
Absolutely.
But I was given a very good lesson as a young manager many years ago. If you can't manage it unless you can measure it. Okay, so shared value. Okay, all well and good. How do you measure it?
You always like to ask me these difficult
Indeed,
questions.
If you don't have the answer, I'm sure you're applying your mind to it.
I do have the answer. It's not scientific, but it is tangible enough for me. So my one measure is sleepless nights, ironically. So if I know in a 7-day cycle, 5 of those 7 days I'm sleeping well, then it's working, right? If I'm sleeping well and I wake up excited, then I think it's working. That's one of my measures. The moment that goes out of kilter, the moment out of a 7-day cycle, it's more days than others, I'm waking up unexcited and I'm going to sleep tired and exhausted, then it's not working, right? That's one measure. The second measure is very obvious, but it's important to me, is if I look around and I look on an annual basis, how many lives have I been able to change? Right? If I'm honest with myself and I say the people that have come into my space and my ecosystem, whether it's through employ, through mentorship, through whatever it is, how many lives have I been able to change? And if that number is either constant or going up, that's a measure for me that shared value is working. If it's going down, then there's a problem. So sleepless nights and lives I can change in my sphere of influence.
How did you sleep last night?
Extremely well.
Mr. Kalenga, thank you very much.
Thank you.